my brother's wedding, my father stood up with the champagne flute and a cordless mic and told 240 people that the family peaked in 1989. "We knew the second he was born," he said, nodding at my brother in his rented tux. "Smartest kid in any room. Top of his class at Yale Law Review, and now this beautiful girl said yes to him. Honestly?" He paused for the laugh he knew was coming. "We should have quit while we were ahead." And then he looked down the head table, found me, and grinned. No offense to the backup. The room laughed, not a polite ripple, a real laugh, the kind that rolls back from the bar and bounces off the tented ceiling of a country club in Westport, Connecticut. 240 people in cocktail dresses and pocket squares laughing at a joke whose whole punchline was me. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye like she was wiping away a tear of pride. My brother raised his glass toward our father and mouthed, "Love you, Dad." His new wife laughed too, because what else do you do? You've known the family 11 hours. I was 24. I put my fork down. I walked out past the gift table and the seating chart with my name in calligraphy at table 9, and I drove home, and I did not speak to any of them again for 8 years. I want to tell you what happened 3 months ago when my phone lit up at 11:40 at night with a number I'd spent 8 years making sure I wouldn't recognize. But first, you need to understand the house I grew up in, because the wedding wasn't the wound. The wedding was just the day the wound got a microphone. We lived on Burgecrest Lane in Westport, one of those towns where the median home goes for a number that makes people from anywhere else make a face. White house, gray slate roof, a Japanese maple. My father trimmed himself because the landscapers didn't do it right. My father was a partner at a corporate firm in Stamford. My mother taught 4th grade for 9 years, then stopped when my brother started winning things because managing his calendar became a full-time job. My brother was 3 years older than me, and he was, I'll be honest, genuinely gifted. Not invented gifted, not parent gifted. The real thing. He won the state debate championship as a sophomore. He played varsity tennis and got a 1560 on his SATs back when that meant something, and Yale called our house. An actual person from admissions called, and my mother cried into the kitchen phone and then framed nothing and changed nothing because she just kept the moment running in a loop for the next decade. I was good at things too, quietly. I got a 3.6, I was on the swim team, I had a job at the Stop and Shop deli counter junior and senior year. Because if I wanted spending money, I earned it. I want you to hold those two facts next to each other. My brother got a BMW 3 Series for his 16th birthday, used but a BMW. I got a $40 gift card to the mall and a lecture about responsibility. When I pointed that out, once, calmly, at 17, my mother said, "He earned that car with his grades," and I said, "I have good grades," and she said, "You have fine grades," and that was the end of it. There was a sentence in our house. I started counting at the year I turned 14, because counting was the only thing I could do with it. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Sometimes it was a full sentence. Sometimes it was just a look across the dinner table when I said I wanted to go to UConn instead of trying for the Ivies. By the time I left for college, I had counted it 53 times. I wrote them in the back of a chemistry notebook with dates, because even at 14, some animal part of me knew that someday I'd need proof I didn't make it up. Dinner was the worst of it. 6 o'clock, the 4 of us, my father at the head and my brother to his right in the good chair, the one with the arms. I sat across by the window where the radiator clinked in winter. My father would ask my brother about his cases. He interned at the firm 3 summers, and lean in and say things like, "That's the instinct, son. That's the thing you can't teach." Then he'd turn to me. "And how's what is it now, the medical assistant thing?" Like he didn't know. He knew. I was in nursing school. I told him I was in nursing school probably 40 times. He just liked the word assistant better. It sat me lower. My bedroom was over the garage. It got cold first and warm last, and the window looked at the neighbor's hedge. My brother had the room with the bay window and the built-in bookshelves. My father installed himself one weekend, standing and standing and standing back to admire it. When I asked, at 15, if I could have the spare room down the hall that nobody used, the one with the real closet, my mother said we might need it for guests. We never once had a guest stay over. Not once in the years I lived there. The room sat empty and beige and mine stayed cold. And I learned the lesson the way you're supposed to learn it. Take up less space. Want less. Need less. Be the kind of daughter who doesn't cost anything. I paid for nursing school myself. Federal loans, a job at the campus health center, and a $3,000 a year academic scholarship I won and never told them about because I didn't want to watch my father not be impressed. My brother's law school, NYU, was paid in full. I found out the number years later from a cousin, $190,000, plus an apartment in the West Village they covered for 2 years so he could focus. I focused too. I focused on a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. clinical rotation and a microwave dinner at 4 in the morning. Nobody covered anything for me to focus. So, the wedding. It was a Saturday in June 2016. I drove up from the city where I'd been a nurse for 8 months. I bought a dress at a loft outlet, navy, $54 on sale, and I did my own hair in the car in the parking lot using the visor mirror because there was no plan that included me getting ready with anyone. The ceremony was on the lawn. The reception was under a tent the size of a small airplane hangar, and there was a raw bar and a swing band and a signature cocktail named after the couple. The whole thing, I learned later, ran about $90,000. My parents paid for most of it. They'd offered me $1,100 toward nursing school in the form of a loan they reminded me about twice. I was at table 9, not the family table. Table 9, with my father's golf friends and a cousin's +1. I told myself it didn't matter. It was my brother's day. I could be small for one more night. I was good at small. Then the toasts started. The best man went. The maid of honor went. And then my father stood up, and you already know what he said because I led with it, because it's the only part anyone ever remembers. What I haven't told you is what happened 20 minutes later by the valet stand when I was waiting for my car with my heels in my hand because they'd started to cut. My mother found me, not to apologize, to manage me. "There you are," she said, like I was a coat she'd misplaced. "People are asking where you went. You're being very obvious." Dad called me the backup into a microphone. "Oh, for God's sake." She actually rolled her eyes. I watched her do it. It was a joke. Everyone laughed. "Your father loves you. He was being warm, and you're going to make this your moment, aren't you, on your brother's wedding day?" My brother came out then, jacket off, tie loosened, glowing the way grooms glow. He saw my face and he had the decency to look uncomfortable for about 1 second. Then he chose the way he always chose. "Hey, don't do this tonight, okay? You know how Dad is. He didn't mean anything." He told everyone I was the part of the family they regret. "He did not say that." My brother laughed a little, that nervous laugh. "You're reading into it. You always do this. You take everything so personally." There it was. Too sensitive. The phrase that had followed me my whole life, that turned every cut into my own fault for bleeding. I looked at my brother. This man I defended in the schoolyard when we were kids, whose acceptance letters I'd actually been happy about before I understood what they meant about me. And I waited for him to say one true thing. "That was cruel. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." 11 words. He had a Yale education and a law degree, and he couldn't find 11 words. "It's my wedding," he said finally. "Can we please not?" The valet pulled my Honda Civic up between a Range Rover and a Mercedes wagon. I gave him $5 I couldn't really spare. I got in the car. My mother knocked on the window. I rolled it down 2 inches. "Where are you going? Dinner's still." "I'm done," I said. "Done with what?" "All of it. You, him, this. I'm done." She made a sound like I was being theatrical and stepped back from the car, and I pulled out onto the post road. And I cried so hard at the light by the Sherwood Diner that a man in the next lane mouthed "you okay?" and I couldn't even nod. That was the last time I saw any of them in person for 8 years. I'd like to tell you it was clean and freeing, the way the no contact posts online make it sound. It wasn't at first. The first holidays were brutal. I spent Thanksgiving that year alone with a rotisserie chicken and a phone. I kept turning over and over, waiting for a text that said, "I'm sorry, come home, we love you exactly as you are." It never came. What came was a Christmas card with a family photo, the three of them, plus my new sister-in-law, and a note in my mother's handwriting that said, "We hope you've had time to think about your behavior." My behavior. I put it through the shredder at the nurse's station and went back to work. And then, slowly, I built something. I want to be precise about this because it matters to the rest of the story. I went back to school while working full-time and became a certified registered nurse anesthetist. 3 years, brutal, expensive, mostly loans again. CRNAs run anesthesia in operating rooms. We manage pain. We manage the exact medications that this story is eventually about, which is a kind of irony I didn't appreciate until much later. By the time I was 30, I was making real money for the first time in my life, working at a hospital in Chicago, far enough from Connecticut that I'd stopped flinching at the area code. I made a family that chose me. My friend Priya, who I met in CRNA school and who has seen me cry more than my actual mother ever did, her husband Sam, a neighbor named Nadia who feeds my cat when I'm on nights. I had Thanksgivings with 11 people and 3 kinds of pie and not a single comparison made at the table. I went to therapy, a Tuesday night appointment with a woman named Dr. Okafor, who spent the first year just convincing me that wanting things wasn't selfish. I was okay. I was genuinely finally okay. Then, 3 months ago at 11:40 on a Wednesday night, my phone rang with a 203 number, and against every rule I'd made, I let it go to voicemail, and then I listened to the voicemail, and then I listened to the voicemail, and my whole built life tilted on its axis. It was my mother. She sounded old. She sounded scared, which I'd never once heard. "It's me. I know you don't. I know, but it's your brother. He's in trouble, real trouble, the kind we can't. Please call me. Please. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to do." And then it cut off. The mailbox had a limit. The sentence just ended, And I sat on the edge of my bed at midnight, staring at the word, my heart doing something complicated. I didn't call back that night. I didn't sleep either. At 6 a.m., there was a text from a different number, my Aunt Lorraine, my mother's sister, who'd always been the one decent adult in that family. "Margot, honey, I know it's not fair to ask you, but your brother is in a very bad way, and you might be the only one who can reach him. Will you let me explain? Just listen, you don't have to do anything." I called my aunt on my lunch break, standing in the stairwell by the OR, and she told me everything, and it took 20 minutes, and I had to sit down on the concrete step halfway through. My brother, the golden one, the Yale one, the one they got right, had made partner at 34. Big firm, Manhattan. Then, 2.5 years ago, he tore something in his lower back in a skiing accident in Vermont. Herniated disc, 2 surgeries, the second one botched enough that he had a second opinion talking about a third. They put him on oxycodone. He took it the way you're supposed to take it, and then the prescription ran out and the pain didn't, and that's the trapdoor a lot of people fall through, the gap between when the pills stop and the pain doesn't. He started seeing more than one doctor. He started buying online. He was, by the time anyone admitted it out loud, a 40-pound lighter version of himself who'd been quietly asked to leave the partnership in the spring, whose wife had taken their 4-year-old daughter to her mother's in Darien in the fall, and who was now alone in the house they'd been about to lose, not answering the door, not eating, screaming at my parents to leave him alone every time they tried. "He has a daughter," my aunt said. "Ada. She's the sweetest little thing. And your brother is going to die, Margot, the doctors as much as said it. And your parents are so far in denial, they think if they just find the right thing to say it'll fix itself. You're a nurse. You're the only one in this family who actually knows about any of this. I'm not asking you to forgive anybody. I'm asking you to help save a man's life." I sat in that stairwell for a long time. Here's the thing nobody tells you about going no contact with people who hurt you. It works. The peace is real. And then, one day, the person who said you were the backup is dying, and you find out that the peace was never the same thing as not caring, and you have to decide what kind of person you actually are when no one's watching and no one would blame you for hanging up. I called Dr. Okafor and got an emergency session. I told her the whole thing in one long run-on, and then I asked her the only question that mattered. Do I owe them anything? No, she said. You don't owe your parents one single thing. She let that sit. But I notice you didn't ask whether you owe your brother or his daughter. I cried for most of the hour. I told her I hated him. She said gently, he was 27 at that wedding, raised by the same people, terrified of ever being anything other than the prize. That doesn't excuse him. But it might explain him. And then she said the thing that actually moved me. You keep saying you've healed. There's a version of this where you find out whether that's true, where you walk back into the worst room of your life and you don't fall apart. You don't have to. But I think part of you wants to know if you can. I booked a flight to LaGuardia that night. I want to be very clear about how I did it because this part matters to me. I did not come crawling back. I came back on my terms, with conditions I wrote down on the plane like a contract, because I'd learned the hard way that with these people you do not leave anything to interpretation. I texted my mother before I landed. I'm coming for one reason, Preston. I am not coming for you. I will not be staying with you. We will not be having a reconciliation. If you make this about anything other than getting him into treatment, I get on a plane and you never hear from me again. Those are the terms. Tell me you understand them in writing. She wrote back, whatever you need. Thank you, and I'll admit it landed somewhere in my chest. The thank you, the first one I could remember. I went straight to my brother's house, not my parents'. A Center Hall Colonial in Fairfield with a dead lawn and 3 Amazon boxes rotting on the porch and a BMW in the driveway with a flat tire and a parking ticket under the wiper. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again and said, "It's me. It's Margot. I'm alone. I'm not here for them." The door opened on a man I would not have recognized on the street. My brother had always been the handsome one. He was gray. His cheeks were sunken, and his eyes were yellow at the edges, and his hand on the door frame was shaking, and he looked at me. And the first thing this Yale-educated former partner said to his backup sister after 8 years was, "You came." I came. I figured you'd be the last person. He half-laughed, and it turned into a cough. Maybe the only person. I'm a nurse. I know what dying looks like before it finishes. He was on the road to it. I stepped inside a house that smelled like a man who'd stopped, and I started doing the only thing I've ever been good at, which is the thing they called assistant work, which is keeping a human being alive. I'm not going to pretend the next 3 days were tender. He was sick. Withdrawal is its own kind of hell, and I won't dress it up. But somewhere in hour 20, sitting on his bathroom floor at 3 a.m. with a glass of Gatorade and a cold washcloth, he said, "I laughed at the wedding." When Dad said that, I laughed and I saw your face and I laughed harder so he wouldn't turn it on me. I thought about your face for 8 years. I know, I said. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. No, I said, it doesn't, but you can say it anyway. I'm sorry. Okay, I said. And I meant, okay, I heard you, not okay, it's fine. He understood the difference. I think it was the first honest exchange we'd had in our entire lives. My parents wanted to come over. I told them no. My father called and started in on how he'd researched some outpatient option that would let Preston keep his dignity and not air this publicly. And I realized he was still, even now, more worried about the neighbors than his son, and I hung up on him. My mother kept trying to make it a family event, all of us in a room, and I said the sentence I'd waited my whole life to say and finally had the standing to mean, this is not about you. For once in your life, this is not about you. Sit down and stay out of my way and let me work. She sat down. She stayed out of my way. It turns out you can train people even at 63 if you stop needing their approval first. I found the place myself. This is where being a CRNA stopped being an irony and started being a gift. I knew what to look for: medically supervised detox, because going cold turkey off opioids at his level can do real damage, medication assisted treatment, not the abstinence only programs that look impressive and fail people, a 90-day residential program, not the 28-day version that exists mostly to satisfy insurance. I made 11 phone calls in 2 days. I knew which questions to ask because I'd watched the other side of this go wrong in my own operating rooms. I settled on a place in the Berkshires called Cedar Hollow, an old farm property with a real clinical staff and a wait list. I jumped because somebody canceled. It was $31,000 for the 90 days. Insurance would cover a portion, fight us on the rest. My parents said they'd pay. I told them they could pay the medical part, but I was putting the deposit down myself. That day, on my own card, because I needed my brother to know that the backup, the assistant, the one who cost nothing, was the one who showed up with money and a plan when the prize was on the bathroom floor. I'm not proud of needing that. But it was true, and I did it, and I'd do it again. I drove him to Cedar Hollow myself, 2 hours and 40 minutes up through Connecticut into Massachusetts, the trees just starting to turn. He was quiet most of it. Then, somewhere past the state line, he said, "Can I ask you something? Do you hate me?" I thought about it honestly, the way you can only be honest with someone who stops pretending. "I did," I said, "for a long time. I don't anymore." "Why not?" "Because I figured out we were both raised by the same two people and they did it to both of us, just in opposite directions. You got the spotlight and I got the dark, and neither one of those is a place a kid can breathe. You were so scared of being anything less than perfect that you laughed at your own sister to stay safe. That's not a good thing you did, but I understand the cage you did it from." He cried then, the ugly kind, driving 65 on the Mass Pike kind. "I should have protected you. I was older. You were a kid who'd been taught that the only safe place in that family was on Dad's right side. I'm not letting you off the hook. But I'm not carrying it for you anymore either." We got there at 11:20 in the morning. A woman named Marin did his intake, warm and unhurried, asked the right questions, the ones I'd have asked. I stayed for 2 hours, signed what they let me sign, gave them my number as the family contact, because I was, apparently, the family contact now. When it was time to go, I hugged my brother for the first time in 8 years, and it was stiff and strange and real. And he held on a beat longer than I expected, and he said into my shoulder, "I don't deserve this." "Probably not," I said. "Get better anyway." He walked toward the main house, turned once at the door, and lifted his hand. I lifted mine. The door closed. I sat in the rental car in the gravel lot and I cried, and it wasn't grief. It was something closer to disbelief. I'd walked into the worst room of my life and I hadn't fallen apart. Okafor was right. I'd needed to know, and now I knew. He was in for the full 90 days. I signed up for the family therapy track. Virtual, Thursdays at noon, just me and him, not our parents. I want to underline that. Our parents asked to join those sessions, and I said no, and my brother, to his enormous credit, also said no. We talked about the dinner table. We talked about the bay window in the room over the garage. The therapist asked him one Thursday what he wanted me to understand, and he said, that being the favorite wasn't a prize. It was a job I could be fired from any second. I was so scared of slipping that I never once stood up for you because the cost of slipping was becoming you. And the worst part is, I thought becoming you was the bad outcome, and you turned out to be the only solid person in this whole family. He had to stop talking. I'm ashamed of what I thought you were. I told him what I wanted him to understand too. That being ignored doesn't hurt less than being pressured. It just leaves a different scar. That I spent my whole childhood believing I was the spare tire in the trunk. And it took me 8 years and a good therapist and a family I built myself to learn that I was a whole human being the entire time. He's home now. 8 months sober, which his program is careful to say is not a finish line. It's Tuesday, then it's Wednesday, then it's Tuesday again, forever. He's living in a sober apartment in Stamford. His ex-wife is letting him have supervised time with Ada, my niece, who is the funniest 4-year-old in the northeastern United States and who calls me Aunt Margot like she's known me her whole life, which she will now because I'm not disappearing again. My brother's not practicing law right now. He does intake paperwork at a nonprofit and he says it's the first job he's ever had that he doesn't dread. He texts me on Tuesdays, "Still here." I text back, "Still proud." My parents are a longer story. They wanted, once my brother was stable, to put the whole thing behind us as a family. A clean slate. They actually used the word closure, like the 8 years were a clerical error. I told them no. I told them I'd helped Preston because he was a victim of theirs, the same as I was, just sitting in a different chair, and because his daughter deserves a father. I did not help them. I will not be coming for Thanksgiving. They send cards. I don't open them. My father, the man with the microphone, sent a long email about how Tone was misinterpreted at the wedding and how he'd always been my biggest supporter. And I read the first 3 lines and archived it, and I felt absolutely nothing, which is its own kind of healing. The kind nobody warns you about. Not rage, not forgiveness, just a quiet closed door and a life on the other side of it that's full and warm and mine. People ask me if I regret going back. The answer is no, and here's the precise reason. I didn't go back for the people who hurt me. I went back for the one who was hurt alongside me and for a 4-year-old who didn't ask for any of it. And in doing it, I proved something I'd been afraid to test for 8 years. That I could stand in that family's gravity and not get pulled back in. That my boundaries weren't a wall I needed because I was fragile. They were a structure I'd built because I was strong. Here's what I've learned, and then I'll let you go. Healing and reconciliation are not the same thing, and anyone who tells you forgiveness means letting them back in is selling you something. You can help someone and still not owe them your peace. You can love a brother and keep a locked door between you and the people who made him. Boundaries aren't cruelty. Sometimes they're the only reason you survived long enough to be the person who answers the phone at 11:40 at night. If you were ever the spare in your own family, the afterthought, the one they compared, the one whose room got cold first, I want you to hear this from someone who lived it. You were never the backup. You were a whole person in a house that only had room for one kind of light. Find your own light. Build your own table. And if the day ever comes when the favorite needs you, you get to decide, freely, with nothing owed, what kind of person you want to be. I still don't know if I did everything right. Maybe I should have let him hit a harder bottom. Maybe I'll regret keeping the door shut on my parents when one of them is dying. I don't have those answers. Tell me yours if you got them. I read every comment, and I mean that. What was the moment you realized you had to save yourself? My name is Margot. I'm 32. They called me the backup once, into a microphone in front of 240 people. I drove to a farm in the Berkshires 8 years later, and I was the one who showed up. I was never the backup. I was the whole time the one you could count on. For years, I believed the cold room over the garage was something that happened to me. A fact about my childhood I could only carry. It took me a long time to see it was also something being built inside me, brick by brick, every time my father reached for the microphone of his own approval and pointed it at my brother instead. The cruelty wasn't an accident. It came from somewhere, and it went somewhere, and the going somewhere was Preston on a bathroom floor at 34, terrified his whole life of becoming the thing they'd taught us both to fear, me. 2 children raised by the same 2 people, one in a spotlight that burned, one in a dark that froze, and both of us nearly didn't make it out. That's how it works. What gets done to a family doesn't disappear. It just waits for a quieter night to show up. I used to think being the forgotten one made me weak. I had it exactly backward. The kid who has to earn her own spending money, pay for her own school, build her own warmth in a house that wouldn't spare her any, is not the spare. She's the one being forged. Every cold morning over that garage was teaching me to stand on ground nobody handed me. So when the call came at 11:40 at night, I already knew how to do the hardest thing a person can do, which is to walk toward pain that isn't yours to carry and stay standing inside it. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Decide early what kind of person you'll be when no one is keeping score and no one would blame you for walking away, because that decision is the only thing that holds when everything else gives out. I chose to help Preston not because I owed my parents a single thing, I didn't, but because a 4-year-old named Ada deserved a father, and because the man on that floor was a victim of the same house I was. That's the difference between bitterness and a real spine. Bitterness keeps the door shut to protect a wound. Strength keeps the door shut on the people who hurt you and still opens a window for the ones worth saving. Get sharp about the world, too. I could only save my brother because I'd spent 8 quiet years becoming good at something real. I knew which questions to ask, which programs were honest, which promises were lies dressed up in brochures. Pain plus skill is how you become useful when it counts. And use what you learn the hard way to lift someone, not just to survive. I don't know if I got every choice right. Maybe Aunt Lorraine was wiser than all of us the whole time. What I know is that I walked back into the worst room of my life and I didn't fall apart, and that told me everything. You were never the backup. You were the one being built strong enough to show up, so build. Stay decent. Stay clear-eyed. And the day the favorite finally needs you, you'll get to decide. Free and owing nothing, exactly who you are.